WTS presents
3, 2, 1.
All the Feelings. This episode.
Belonging.
Pete, we are already over halfway through ATF 807 Lock and Load. Stop saying things about guns. How are you today? You are actually home in Colorado Springs, so you're on assignment.
I'm on assignment.
Because you're home with friends and family, which is perfect because do you know what we're talking about today?
I don't. I've prepared nothing.
Today's feeling, if that's a word for it, is belonging.
Belonging. Noun. An affinity for a place or situation. A feeling of being happy or comfortable as part of a particular group and having a good relationship with the other members of the group because they welcome you and accept you.
Pete, we are 7 episodes into this season, and let's be honest. I've been neglecting a very important part of this podcast. With your permission, I'd like to take you on one of my famous guided meditations.
Oh, God.
You ready?
I knew I was missing them, but I did not know how much until just now.
Well, because you already traveled to Colorado Springs. Now you're going to travel in your own noggin. So let's cue that background kind of either ocean sound or really nice kind of thing.
Sure.
And now just close your eyes and relax. Pete, imagine you're walking outside and the sun is shining down. And as always, you're barefoot and there's construction happening nearby, but you don't walk towards them. Instead, you're relaxed and you walk over toward a crowd of people. They're smiling and clapping for you, Pete. And you feel relaxed and calm and you walk toward them and they embrace you. They love you fully and unconditionally, Pete, and you're relaxed and you feel held. You feel held by them and you realize your pockets are heavy because they're filled with your possessions. But this crowd of people, they'll take that weight off of you. So you give them all of your stuff and you're lighter and you're relaxed. And now they hug you and ask you to join them forever so you can never leave, but you wouldn't want to anyway. So you say yes and you're breathing and you're relaxed. And they say they love you so much you don't need anyone else in your life, so you can relax and never talk to your other friends or family anymore because this crowd is your new family. So you wave goodbye to your old family. Goodbye, old family, and you're relaxed. And oh, look, your new family, they brought juice and you love juice and you're going to drink the juice together and you're relaxed and the juice tastes weird and now we're waking up. Pete, how do you feel?
Am I a Scientologist now? Is that all it takes?
That's all it takes. And it all starts with being barefoot. Pete, have you heard of Abraham Maslow? M-A-S-L-O-W.
Oh, I have. And here's where our research overlaps.
Oh, really? Do you have Maslow's
excited.
hierarchy of human needs?
You know, I just wanted to make sure it was in my set in case you forgot.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, for the listening audience, back in 1940, so that is proof that we do not consult each other and we just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall.
We just nail it every week.
Well,
yeah.
I'm taking Maslow's mine this week. Mine Maslow. Back in 1943, he developed what is known as Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. And it's basically a graph that looks like a pyramid. At the bottom are basic physiological needs like food and water. The next level up is what he calls safety needs like security, resources, and health. And then right in the middle is what, Pete? Because you're so smart about Maslow.
Belongingness and love needs, Tom.
Exactly right. The need for belonging, to feel accepted, loved, and part of something. And this pyramid is still widely cited today in both of our research. The reason I bring that up is that shows how vitally important and intrinsic our need for belonging is. Without it, we can't reach the top 2 levels of the hierarchy, which, as you know, is esteem and then ultimately self-actualization, the wanting to be the best you can be. So without belonging, Maslow's saying we are stuck merely satisfying our basic needs to just live. And as I did in my guided meditation, and because I'm an old grump and a weirdo, I wanted to talk about how belonging can have a very dark side. I wanted to turn the idea of belonging on its head and talk about how our need for belonging can be dangerous. And of course, I'm talking about gangs, or more specifically, cults, Pete.
Oh, Tom, so dark. You're launching us so dark.
Right? You give me belonging, I give you cults. And we are all going to be drinking something by the end of this episode. Now, I've always been fascinated with cults. Has it ever interested you? And if so, do you know why?
Okay, why? I don't know that I can answer, but am I interested in cults? Am I fascinated by cults? Absolutely. Do I write fan fiction about cults?
No.
Surprising no one. Yes, I do. I feel like I feel like cults, like the idea of creating a manipulated, malicious sense of belonging, is something that everybody should think about from time to time, lest we forget how we ourselves are being manipulated. So I'm deeply fascinated through historical cults, Jonestown, like all the way through, the suddenly now I've forgotten the name of it, but it's the Nexium cult, right? The sex cult that is fascinating. The whole story is fascinating. So hashtag Smallville.
It is. Yeah, that's watching reruns of that is always a very interesting experience now.
Very interesting.
Like, I wouldn't follow her. With the Nexium thing. Well, and I just watched for research for this script I'm writing with friend of the show, Mandy Kaplan, and her amazing writing partner, Jonas. We watched this thing called The Deep End about Teal. Oh, what's her first name? This is good that I brought this up and I don't have any of the proper nouns needed. But either way, it's always just sort of like cults hanging in there, still doing cults. Like, I feel like it wouldn't keep happening.
Yeah.
And that's one of my fascination with it, is how could you ever get involved in a cult?
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Right.
Pete, I did a little bit of research.
And did you figure it out?
I figured it out. No, this is just something that never quite occurred to me when I flippantly say, why would you ever be in a cult? There's a therapist named Rachel Bernstein, and she works with former cult members to get their lives back on track after they blow. To use a Scientology phrase, after they leave the cult. And she says, quote, a lot of people will say, how could you have gotten involved? And it's because you're never given all the information about a group that turns out to be a cult from the beginning. So you only have the information to go on that you've been given, which is very select, and you make your judgment call based on that. No one's able to make a fully educated decision before getting involved in a cult. Of course. No one says, you don't start with the juice. You start with the hugs. And, you don't start with Xenu. You start with e-meters. You start very low Dianetics-y kind of way, to use Scientology, to get you in. I guess I just never really quite thought about that. And that makes it so insidious, again, to go back to Triangle McGee, about using, like you said, weaponizing, what did you say? Malicious belonging. The need for is so insidious. And I'm glad that you brought up Nexium, because in The Vow, the documentary, there's a anonymous former member who I think if I remember correctly, they call her Jane or June. And she said she was drawn to Nexium because of the sense of community it provided.
Yes.
She says that she had struggled forming deep relationships with other women throughout her life. So when she heard how close-knit members of Nexium were, and that it was a women-only group she could join, she loved it. She became interested.
Yeah.
It's just that simple. And that's very scary. And there's something desperately sad about that.
Well, and look at, we're just talking about belongingness on I believe you just called him his formal name, Triangle McGee.
Referring to Maslow. Yeah.
Yeah. Which
Sorry.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm sure that's what his friends and family call him. But look at what the rest of the hierarchy dictates, right? So we have physiological needs, food and water. Okay, so that's fine. Safety needs, security needs. Right? It's arguably a lot of cult activity satisfies that need. And once that need is satisfied, how much easier is it to say belongingness? You belong here. You're appreciated here. And then the last two, which I don't think you talked about in this review, esteem needs, prestige, feeling of accomplishment, like you're moving up in the ranks. And then finally, self-actualization. You brought up Dianetics.
I did list both of those. Yeah.
You did, but probably not loud enough for me to hear them on the headphones. Self-actualization, which again is like making you feel like you're a part of this thing, you belong to this thing, and you are now making a difference in it, right?
Right.
Your participation is better as a result of it. And I think that stuff is fascinating. It's like Maslow wrote Starting a Cult 101 and then presented the hierarchy of needs.
Interesting. Yes, because there is we already used the word insidious, or I did. I don't know if you heard it. I'm
sorry.
Shouting into a tunnel.
Right.
You just start doing the Feeling Friends segment while I'm talking, and I'm like, okay, this isn't working. so many just normal relationships mimic cult stuff in a way. And I actually wanted to, this is something that I wanted to bring up. I'm not saying love is a cult, but
okay.
I do
what
like,
you hear when you say certain things, right?
I know.
Like,
yes.
Yeah.
I'm not a hater and love is not a cult.
Yes. I'm not saying love is not a cult.
Sure. Of course we landed on the moon. Okay. No, I'm not a crazy person, but I do, going through some of the basic things that cults do to get you involved.
Oh, like processes of indoctrination.
Process of indoctrination, that's the one. Are mimic, some of them are mimic like getting into a new relationship, a love relationship. And I just had 3 that, because number 1 is pick the right target. So if you are single, you're alone and you're lonely, you're anxious to find love and find the right person. Right?
Are you just for a second, are you like workshopping a spec episode of Black Mirror right now? Like it kind of feels like that's where you're going with this, and you're using us, I say us, the feeling friends and audiences members as guinea pigs. That feels mean.
I'm still going. Number 2, have you heard the term love bombing?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Love bombing is when you are really, you just fall head over heels, and you all of the people in the cult really surround you and make you feel incredibly needed and incredibly important. Like you said, you're important to them, they're important to you. That's, of course, love bombing. That's what happens when you're in a new relationship. You want to spend all your time with each other, and that then leads to isolation. How often have you had a friend, at least growing up, when you see a lot less of them before they got into a serious relationship? How many times have you heard the cliche, we never see you anymore, you're spending all your time with blank? So I just think that that's it. They're using very natural, because that's healthy in building a romantic relationship. Of course, it's a little less healthy when you're in a cult, but I like how they sort of mimic each other, which I think is really interesting. And then to use, when you talked about safety, fear is a big part of it. Fear can be what really you start to turn with the isolation, is it becomes a us versus them kind of a thing. And then that's when if you try to get out, they really need to keep upping the ante of that fear and no longer belonging. If you have to leave, they need to present the clear answer to what you're afraid of or what you are missing in your life. Right. That's one of the big things, is the black and white. And then to go incredibly dark, I have a clip from a movie that I would like you to play. Okay. It's from a horror film that you and I both love. It's called The Mist, based on Stephen King's novella. And for those that haven't seen The Mist, it's a bunch of people are trapped in a supermarket when a bunch of monsters are outside, because there's like a portal to another dimension. Anyways, and there's this one woman named Mrs. Carmody in there who is religious, who's sort of looked at as the town kook, but then she starts really preaching about different things and about how it's God punishing them. And I think it makes an interesting point about cults and belonging and how dark it can get.
Want another reason to get the hell out of here? I'll give you the best one. Her. Mrs. Carmody. Our very own Jim Jones. I'd like to leave before people start drinking the Kool-Aid.
He's right. Like your people get, the better she's gonna look.
No, I don't buy that. It's obvious she's nuts. Look, a few people maybe, but...
No, I count 4. She's preaching to them right now. By noon, she'll have 4 more. By tomorrow night, when those things come back, she'll have a congregation, and then we can start worrying about who she's gonna sacrifice to make it all better. You, Amanda?
He's right.
You don't have much faith in humanity, do you?
None whatsoever.
I can't accept that. People are basically good, decent. My God, David, we're a civilized society.
Sure, as long as the machines are working and you can dial 911, but you take those things away, you throw people in the dark, you scare the shit out of them. No more rules. You'll see how primitive they get.
You scare people badly enough, you can get them to do anything. They'll turn to whoever promises a solution. Or whatever.
Ollie, please, back me up here.
I wish I could. As a species, we're fundamentally insane. Put more than 2 of us in a room, we pick sides and start dreaming up reasons to kill one another. Why do you think we invented politics and religion?
Now, so obviously that's very dark. And to be clear, I am not taking a shot at basic religion. Mrs. Carmody is portrayed as a religious fanatic. It doesn't take long for her to start demanding expiation and the spilling of blood. But the point is she uses fear as a motivator in order to bring people together, to provide them hope by weaponizing their emotions. And that's a real dark side of belonging. This isn't a lot of fun, I know.
No, it's not. But you know what's interesting about that quote? It also proves the other side, right? They're sitting around a table preaching and talking about how dangerous religion is, right?
Sure. It's almost like you need to pick a side.
Yeah, she's only an other because you're outside of it. Speaking of the royal you, right? Because I would be standing around this little light up table too. But but it does make me reflect on the fact that, you know what? To her flock, all these people who are plotting against her are other. And we're just demonstrating our inability to sit down and solve problems together. And that's what creates the sort of fractious behavior.
Right. And again, it really points out that belonging is right in the middle of that triangle. I mean, we need to appear. I should really call it a pyramid. I don't know. Do you remember the food triangle that you learned about in school? Mm-hmm. Sugar's at the top of the triangle. That you need that. I mean, no matter what, we need to group together in some sort of way. Without that, we're just lost in the darkness. And so that's just why I wanted to bring up cults. It's something that is still incredibly going on. And a lot of it is seen. It seems like a lot more now it is through self-help. Than a lot of the ones, the one about Teal, the deep end, there's a lot about, it can start almost like an MLM.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I wonder sometimes, Tom, is like, I think about cult leaders, and I think in this day and age, because you opened with that question of, oh God, now I'm in a cult. Like, how do you know you're in a cult? And I wonder if today, given the prominence of information and misinformation, if the cult leaders actually fall prey to the same equation, that maybe they're just people who have an idea to share. And before long, they don't realize that oh my God, I just made a cult. And like that is a fascinating thing to me. I say that kind of as a joke, but it's not, right? Like, it's really not. Are fans of Oprah Winfrey part of a cult? Some of them maybe, right? You know, I love Oprah. I think she's great. Am I a member of a cult? And we're going to talk a little bit about this in my part of the segment, which I think is maybe equally dark and frustrating, but we'll see. It's certainly on brand for us.
I know. I love that we gave each other belonging, and we're both like in a pit and playing quotes from The Mist. No, it's very on brand. It's very on brand. No, that's a good point. And I think like a lot of the cult leaders, especially the self-help ones that we were talking about, they absolutely do start from a good place. And then sometimes they get a little taste of power or adulation. And that's when it turns, when you need to keep that. You can't give that up anymore. Of course, if anyone out there, because like Pete, is worried if he's in an Oprah cult, ways to tell, just like 3 of them, there's a whole list of ones that you can find. One is beware of absolute answers of gray issues. That's why I think I would always have trouble being in a cult, is because when anyone says this is the answer to something, even if I kind of believe it, I'm like, I don't know. I think I'm just a contrarian. Watch out for too much us versus them rationale. And the biggest one, I think the number one thing that is like, yep, it's a cult, is if you're ever asked to distance yourself from friends or family. Yeah. Watch out. If you have to, if they become your new community completely, I would maybe take a new look at your triangle pyramid. Things aren't going great.
And finally, if you look around the room and you can't see who the cult leader is, it might be you. Oh, no. And also, by the transitive property, you are Oprah Winfrey. Thank you and good night. Shrimp shells. All right, for me, shrimp shells have always been an annoyance, something to be discarded as I peel back the delicate flesh of these succulent crustaceans. Then I found myself in the rooftop dining room of a department store in downtown Daegu, South Korea, dining on a spicy seafood stew with some friends. The stew had shrimp in it. whole shrimp with the heads and the eyes and the antenna stuff. And the shrimp was looking at me. I naturally ate around the shrimp. That is, until there was nothing left. That's when one of my friends at the table picked up one of the creatures and placed it in my bowl. Good, he said. Eat, eat. You know, we don't usually eat the shells in my community. We don't eat the tails either. But across rural China, there are various traditions, including deep frying all kinds of shelled creatures, shrimp included, and eating them whole. Diners believe the shells contain a vital life essence, never to be wasted. In Japan, shrimp heads are considered a delicacy, valued for their concentration of rich, decadent flavors. Carefully prepared, these shrimp heads impart a depth and savoriness that connoisseurs argue the naked shrimp alone cannot match. So what is the secret of the shell? Apparently, I'm behind the times. Here in the U.S., chefs all across the country have made the turn New Orleans and other parts across the Deep South have known all along. Always eat it all. So back at my table, the shrimp looked into me, and I looked back into it. And my friends, they looked into me too. And then they each held their own giant shrimp in their fingers, poised to put them in their mouths, but waiting for me to make my move. Would I do it? Would I partake in the whole meal with them? Or would I be just one more American shown up by the power of the foreignness of their food? I bit into it. They smiled. They patted me on the back as they bit into theirs. And it wasn't at all what I expected. Crunchy, but not too crunchy. But it tasted of magic, soaked with the flavors of the broth, encompassing not just the spirit of the bowl that sat between us, but the spirit of the table. Is there science behind this cultural wisdom? Are there vital nutrients and flavor compounds hidden within the chitinous walls of the humble shrimp shell? I don't know. You know what? I didn't even check it out, because what I got out of crunching down on that shell was more than a culinary experience. At that table, maybe for the first time since I arrived in the country, I belonged. Do you want to demonstrate you belong without biting down on a thing that stares back at you all the way to your mouth? Become a feeling friend today. For just $35, you'll get access to the member live stream when we record, early access to the shows in your very own member podcast feed, our latest batch of stickers, and a present from Tom, the classic ATF bingo card. Visit our fancy URL for the show, allthefeelings.fun, today.
Excerpts from Belonging by Rosemary Watola Tromer. And if it's true we are alone together, the way blades of grass are alone, but exist as a field. Sometimes I feel it, the green fuse that ignites us, the wild thrum that unites us, an inner hum that reminds us of our shared humanity. Just as 136,000 notes make up one symphony, alone as we are, our small voices weave into the one big conversation. Our actions are essential to the one infinite story of what it is to be alive. When we feel alone, we belong to the grand communion of those who sometimes feel alone. We are the dust that hopes, a rising of dust, a thrill of dust, the dust that dances in the light with all other dust, the dust that makes the world.
Tom, you really went dark with belonging. And I wonder if people see the word belonging and the first thing they expect to hear is not about you're in a cult and you don't even know it.
I know. Maybe I shouldn't have gone first. But I had to get my Triangle McGee in there.
You had to get Triangle McGee out there. I want to back the truck up a little bit and just ask you, what are the different ways we sort of self-organize as humans?
All the different ways? Like
all of, I'd like you to know all of them. No, just a couple. You know, what do you think about? Okay.
Religion. Politics.
Sure.
Family, friends. Friends of friends.
When you think of belonging, what's the first one you think of?
friends.
Yeah.
Is that good? Does
Yeah,
that help?
well, and it's me too. And I wonder if that is if that's a principled response of privilege, as we are middle-aged white guys. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because before we started talking about this, doing this show, and the listeners may remember last time as we closed out the show, we said, we don't know what we're talking about. And that was true. And so here we are. I had the opportunity to sit down with some friends, a diverse group, right? There were many people of color and we were all sitting around talking about, talking about our feelings, as you're wont to do. And I asked, I'm preparing this podcast and we're going to be talking about belonging. And what is the first thing you think about when you think of belonging? And it took the people of color half a second to say race. Like, it's the first thing is like our color.
I didn't even say that as one of the options.
I know. I didn't either. I didn't even think about it. And I think that is the challenge that makes belonging a complicated question of privilege. And it's privilege from the in-group and from the perspective of the out-group, right? That it is so deeply contextually driven, belonging to what, to whom, to when, to why, right? And DNA is one of them. The other ones that you mentioned are they fall into the broader characters of either purpose. We're working toward a thing together, right? And we're on the same page. Maybe that's we're working to grow the cult for 23 or something like that. But maybe it's, we're aiming to help, end homelessness and the unhoused in our community, or we're attempting to, feed those who need to be fed or something like that. There's also the ideology, and that's, you talk about politics. That's where we find, great divides in ideology and in-group, out-group messaging, right? We're a part of this group, and so we share, certain common beliefs and traits that make us satisfy the safety needs, that because we believe together, right, then we are safer. We're not alone. And our belongingness and love needs and our esteem needs. We feel like we've accomplished something by, say, getting our candidate into office or whatever. But as soon as you start peeling back the Maslowness of it, it starts, like, belonging starts feeling a little bit fragile. And so I wanted to add the two more pieces to what it means to belong, right? Not just that it satisfies these deep needs, but what we talked about last week with efficacy, right? Self-efficacy. We went down that whole long thing that was probably useless for everybody, but efficacy defines, how does my belonging to this group bring out the best in me? How does it allow me to participate in more than name only, in more than rank only? And second, effort. Like, how hard is it for me to do the work of being a part of this community? Is it, hard work is made easy when you are in a shared, objective, when you're working toward a shared goal, or you're in a shared group. And I find those things really interesting sort of constituent elements that come around to belonging, without having to specifically talk about race, color, creed. But it might make it easier to see when we self-organize. That's why, right? That's why we're organizing. What do you think about this?
Well, to point out, originally this season was going to be called All the White Feelings. I'm embarrassed that race didn't come up. I'm still dealing with it.
I know. Me too. And I didn't even have to out that as a thing, but I outed us both as, like, not having any, like, we're so white and privileged.
You dug a hole in the forest and we both jumped in.
And we have to talk about it, right? Because that's the point, that's the feeling, is regret.
Right. But no, I mean, there is strength. There's strength in teamwork. There's strength in numbers. All of that, of course, makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's enormous amount of comfort to come from that too.
Yeah. Right. And it feels it like, when we go back to our old friend evolutionary rationale for a feeling, evolutionarily, belonging was good. When we felt like we belonged to a group, our health and safety legit depended on it, because don't forget, the patented "what's that smell? All the feelings" saber-toothed tiger is always there around the next corner. And when you are in an in-group of like-minded individuals whose mission is don't get eaten by that saber-toothed tiger right there, then you are doing something and reinforcing the belonging behavior that goes on to define cultures, microcultures, macrocultures, and civilization, right? So I think that's really interesting. I think there is the thing that I teased that I might go dark. This is where I talk. So if you don't want to go dark again, you could pretend that we just told a funny joke and the music started playing, and then skip.
Oh no! How dark can we do it? Are you just going to play the rest of The Mist?
No, I'm not. I came across this concept that I hadn't thought about.
Okay.
It's the concept of the imagined community. What do you know of the imagined community? And I think this is a thing that is native to us, like 20th century and beyond. Like I don't know that this was a thing evolutionarily useful, but maybe it was. Maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong, but I just think it's interesting. Have you ever heard of the concept?
I've never heard of the concept, but something immediately sprung to my mind when you use those two words together.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook. The idea of social media making it seem like we're closer than we actually are. And so you're like, oh yeah, I just, checked in with that person, but you didn't. You liked something that they did, and that's different than talking to them on the phone. I've become less of a grouch about this because I lost my war against Facebook a long time ago. But just, that was a real concern that I had, of the people thinking that they were much closer than they were. And then, so.
Yes.
Did I get it right?
You absolutely, you are, yes, it is a part of it. And I want to tell you the whole thing, because it deserves a full title. Historian Benedict Anderson wrote the book Imagined Communities: Reflections on the Origin and Spread of Nationalism.
Oh no.
It was published in 1983. Okay. And I had never thought of this concept. I had never heard it. I can't believe it hasn't been brought up in my circle. But the whole concept is this. It refers to the ways individuals come to see themselves as part of a larger group or social construct, right, with whom they will never fully meet or engage, right? And Anderson goes on to say we could be talking about a nation, right? What does it mean to be an American or a Canadian or a Mexican or an Argentinian? That becomes, when you break down what those barriers are, those become artificial, like political divides that make national boundaries. And those of us who celebrate some sort of, vein of patriotism, celebrate that arbitrary boundary. It's an arbitrary boundary. I could be on the border of North Dakota and in minutes be eating poutine. And does that, am I more or less American or Canadian, right, at that given time? And I think that is a fascinating thing. But when we add digital media, to this concept of imagined communities, that's when we start getting these the followings that creep up on social media that imagine they're a part of this greater thing, when no one in their immediate practical community shares any of the ideology behind those things, right?
Interesting. Well, because that goes back to like YouTube rabbit holes.
Yes.
That we have friends and friends of friends and some of their kids and stuff have every once in a while gone down into a rabbit hole, and you really believe, oh, I'm really a part of this community.
Yeah.
But it's just because YouTube is amplifying this very small amount of voices in order to make you believe that Bitcoin is a good idea.
Yes. That Bitcoin is a great example. Yeah. Going to a pizza place with a gun to free the children who are not in the basement. No. That is another example that's often discussed in this in this circumstance. So this is imagined communities. While I think imagined communities can be a real conceit for good. It's good to see yourself, to feel yourself and to develop a sense of pride about who you are and how your identity aligns with others. for positive, right? For good.
Mm-hmm.
But this, we can also see how these, like the imagined community can be manipulated, can grow outside of rational thought
Mm-hmm.
or experience and outside of fact, and create real practical problems. Because we feel in alignment. And I think, when I talk about digital communities for good, I think about people who write into the show. I think about people who, we've been on the ADHD podcast. We have a large community over in the ADHD community. And those are people who may never meet in person, right? But they're part of that community. And even if they're never speaking up,
Right.
they share an alignment with those who do speak up, because
Mm-hmm.
they can see those things together. And I think that is an imagined community that can be real. It's the imagined community that becomes dangerous, right? And Anderson says he has 3 points that are a little bit impenetrable, but I'll try. It's
Okay.
imagined, the imagined community is imagined as limited because even the largest nation has finite, if elastic, boundaries, beyond which lie other nations. No nation imagines itself as coextensive with mankind.
I need help with that.
Right. What does that even mean? Coextensive with mankind, right? The coextensive means extending over the same space or time, or corresponding exactly in extent, right? And a nation is a political body,
Mhm.
not a human body, right? It's
Got
an
it. Yes.
arbitrary, and so it is limited, but we are not. And that's a conflict. It is imagined as sovereign because this concept was born in an age which Enlightenment and revolution were destroying the legitimacy of the divinely ordained hierarchical dynastic realm, right? So, yeah, I know, but this should be right up your alley because we're talking about Enlightenment and revolution, right?
Sure.
That our imagined communities are being tested by former structures of
Landlords.
religion, landlords, fiefdoms, right?
Yeah. Landlords with crowns.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And an imagined community is imagined as a community because regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail in each, a nation is always conceived as a deep horizontal comradeship. Ultimately, it is this fraternity that makes it possible over the last 2 centuries for so many millions of people, not so much to kill as willingly to die for such limited imaginings. That's right. This is patriotism.
Right.
This is, we have created this arbitrary structure, and the borders say that we are France. And as French people, because we all share this, this ideology, this identity as French people living inside this arbitrary boundary, we're willing to die for that union.
Right. Well, and the first thing that it reminds me of is Bill Hicks, one of my favorite comedians. That was his take on patriotism was, am I proud to be American? I mean, my parents had sex there. Like, what
exactly
is it? Like, that's
Yep.
why you are where you are.
Nailed it.
And yeah.
Right.
And so, you know what it also reminds me of? If we can take it away from just like different, if it's not just patriotism, and I'm not trying to go political with this, but when did red states, blue states become such a big thing? We say it now like it's the most natural thing in the entire world, but it wasn't like that when I was a kid.
I always
Like,
felt
I don't
like
remember-
that was a Reagan thing. I don't know. I may be misinterpreting my experience of
it?
childhood, but it felt like that sort of like branding
Yeah.
states as having their own ideology, which is totally false. Like,
It's crazy.
You live in California, and that is perceived as a wildly progressive blue state. But there are really deep reds in California.
No, go to the Eddie Beach community. They're still flying flags everywhere, and the flags I don't care for. Yeah,
Same
it's
thing
not
with Oregon. Like, it's the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
it is vastly, more complicated fabric of
right.
what patriotism means as an Oregonian.
Yeah, I like your idea of that. I would think it's either be Reagan or one of the Bushes. It seems like around that time period that I guess the news just decided that was a good way to do it, to make us all insane.
Right. And suddenly we have a language to define not just inclusion, but exclusion.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. Now we've just branded the state of Oregon as a blue state. only because a lot of people live in Portland. That's it. That's the only reason.
Yes. Some people have heard of Hollywood.
Yeah, right.
And therefore we're all elitists.
Everybody's elite. Yep.
It is, because that is fascinating. When you just say red state, you're actually saying paragraphs of supposed information that changes for one person to the other. Yeah, if you live in a red state, you would define that in a certain way. If you live in a blue state, you would define that in a certain way. But I just wanted to bring that up as even within a nation, there are battle lines, for lack of a better word, being drawn about identity, about belonging and community.
Well, this leads me to the last, and I should say, for all those who left, I hope you've come back, because I do want to ask you this question, because I think it really defines in-group, out-group. To what, Tom, would you call yourself a fan?
What would I call myself a fan of? Tons of things, like books, movies.
Because this is what we're talking about too, right?
Haunted houses, roller coasters, all the stuff I talked about joy earlier.
Right.
Dogs.
You're a fan of stuff, right? And to the extent that your fandom enforces activism is the extent to which communities are created around things, right? And I think this ends up being really special, and more special now, having thought about all these other kind of, introductions to crazy, negative things around belonging. And then I think, oh my gosh, you know what else I've made fun of in the past? Twilight fans. I'm never gonna do that again. I'm never going to do that again, because frankly, they're celebrating something. They're celebrating the Venn diagram overlap of the way their identities overlap in a really positive way. And I think there's reason to celebrate fandoms. And so I'm a fan of Star Trek. I love Star Trek. I'm a fan. I don't know if you've heard, I'm a huge fan of F1 now. Yeah, that's right. I watched the entire Singapore Grand Prix this weekend. And so those are things that I love diving deep into these things and celebrating with other people. When I see another person, I already imagine myself as part of this fandom, right? It's my imagined community, even though I don't really know a lot of people who drive F1. I don't know any. But when someone comes up to me and says, oh my God, you just said the word, you just said the thing that triggered my fandom too, and now I'm here to celebrate with you. That feels exuberant, exultant. It feels so good, right? To know that I'm not alone. I belong, even with it's one other person. But the likelihood of belonging to more means just one other person represents a sample. And that feels good.
It does feel good. And it makes me feel bad for how long growing up I spent in snarkiness. Because
me too.
Fandom and, geek culture, for a terrible phrase, all of this stuff has really changed over our lifetime. Superheroes. I mean, so much of the outside have become inside. Dungeons and Dragons, all of those things. But like Static, the short film that Johnny Giacalone and I made, we were recently in a horror convention in Long Beach. And walking around that horror convention, there are just a lot of people like me. And then there's a lot of horror people that are fully dressed up, like they're Pinhead, like they're all sorts of...
I was going to say Pinhead. Why is he the first person we think of?
The reason is because it looks like it took the most amount of time.
Yeah.
It's not
Most
someone
patience.
putting on a hockey mask and being like, boo. It's someone
Pinhead is a fan.
Yes. If it's done right. I mean, and it's hot under there. And you look, but when I was growing up, I would have seen them as the other and been like, oh boy, manufactured personality much. Now I'm so much more like, this is for you. This is not for me. It's like being mad at people that don't sing great at karaoke. What are you doing? This is for them. This is the idea of being able to, I'm not a professional singer. And so I get the chance to go up in front of people and sing like I do in the shower. And so all of that snarkiness, I believe, has really drained out of me and has for a long time. I wish I could go back to young Tom and been like, it's not that cool being Chandler. Being Chandler all the time. Like that guy sucks.
Chandler aged poorly.
Well, in a couple ways.
It's okay.
Boy, oh boy, I read the book. So, but no, I like the idea of if it's not hurting anybody, it's helping people. Because if it's a community, and communities are great. And that's belonging. That's healthy belonging. And there's no reason
right.
to yuck that. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the most. And so when it goes back to like thinking about, man, how hard it is to have someone else look at a community that you value and say, yeah, but your community doesn't value me. Right? We can be a fandom, sports team, sci-fi, whatever, Twilight. Who cares? Or racial, gender, whatever. Those are the things that cause such immediate pain. And I think that's the thing that gives me so much sort of stuff to think about as we wrap up this conversation. I mean, as we said, this is kind of our first time exploring belonging as a bouquet of feelings that come along with the experience of in-groups, out-groups. And it's really hard and super scary and definitely more complicated than I ever gave it credit for. And I would also, I do want to shout out as a reference, I kind of can't believe that this place exists, but it's fantastic. It is the Othering and Belonging Institute at Berkeley. Yeah. Lots of information on belonging. The Othering and Belonging Institute. It's at belonging.berkeley.edu. And they talk about all of the concepts that we've talked about and so much more in terms of figuring out how to help people feel safe and included in their communities and not excluded from others they choose not to identify with. Right.
Wow. Berkeley, go for it.
Pretty special joint. So have to shout out to that one.
Well, as long as we're shouting out and about belonging and wonderful communities, have you heard of Dave and Buster's? It's great. You get all these tokens. And you zoom along, and there's a whole skee ball gang, and it's pretty cool.
Said them all drink special lamba, special lamba, special lamba. Oh, we drink special lamba. Happy we shall be.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this episode. This week's tune is More We Are Together by Energy Plus. Tom, how do we have a topic of joy and emotion that it just exudes joy and light and that we can really crap all over next week?
Absolutely. Let's just keep this belonging train going because there's one thing that we all belong to. It's a club called stress. We are going to be talking about the human emotion and feeling of stress. And I'm already sweating.
Oh, I can't wait. Until then, I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Tommy Metz III. Thank you so much for downloading. We'll be back next week with All the Feelings.
Make we sip it till it's done.